Prayer is far more than the act of speaking words toward heaven. It is the living connection between the heart of a believer and the heart of God. Many people treat prayer like a phone call they make only when something goes wrong. But true prayer is more like an open line that never hangs up. It's not just about communicating requests. It's about remaining in communion. Communication can happen occasionally, but connection is constant. A believer who is connected to God through prayer doesn't wait for Sunday morning to talk to Him. They carry the awareness of His presence into every moment, at work, in the car, in the kitchen, or even in the midst of chaos. When Jesus prayed, He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He prayed to stay aligned with the Father's will. His prayer life wasn't a ritual, it was a relationship. Every miracle He performed flowed out of that intimate connection. He said, "I do nothing on my own. I only do what I see the Father doing." That kind of clarity comes only through connection, not casual conversation. When you stay connected to God through prayer, you begin to see things from His perspective. You don't just talk to God, you start hearing from God. The noise of fear, doubt, and distraction begins to fade, and His peace becomes louder than your problems. Prayer connects you to divine power, divine wisdom, and divine timing. Without it, you're operating on limited strength. Imagine trying to use a phone that isn't charged. You can hold it. You can admire it. But it won't work unless it's connected to power. The same is true for your spiritual life. You can quote scripture, attend church, and serve faithfully, but without prayer, the battery of your soul runs low. Connection is what gives life to your faith. When you pray, the Holy Spirit plugs you into heaven's current, and suddenly you're not just surviving, you're walking in supernatural strength. Too many believers reduce prayer to a transaction. God, give me this, or Lord, fix that. But real prayer is transformation. It changes you before it changes your situation. When you are connected to God, prayer stops being a chore and starts being a lifeline. You stop begging and start believing. You stop worrying and start resting. You stop trying to convince God to act and start trusting that He already has a plan. This kind of prayer doesn't always change the circumstances, but it will always change your heart in the midst of them. And when you are connected to God in prayer, even silence becomes sacred. You realize that being in His presence is enough. You learn to breathe differently, think differently, and respond differently. That's the kind of connection that keeps your spirit steady when the storm hits. The winds may blow, but the connection holds firm. Prayer, then, is not just what you do when you need God. It's how you stay connected to the God you always need. To pray without ceasing means to live in a continuous awareness of God's presence, to carry Him into every conversation, every challenge, and every decision. It's not about spending every moment on your knees, but about keeping your heart bowed before Him. Prayer must become the rhythm of your life, not just a reaction to trouble. Many people treat prayer like a fire extinguisher, something to break open in case of emergency. But God designed prayer to be more like oxygen, something we need to breathe every moment. When Paul wrote, "Pray without ceasing," he wasn't calling for endless repetition. He was inviting believers into unbroken fellowship with the Father. Prayer must be constant because life is constant. Temptation doesn't take a break, anxiety doesn't clock out, and spiritual battles don't pause. So why should prayer? The enemy is persistent, and the believer must be even more persistent. When you pray only occasionally, you fight spiritual battles with limited ammunition. But when prayer becomes your lifestyle, you walk in a continual flow of divine strength and discernment. You begin to sense God's direction before decisions, His comfort before panic, and His correction before mistakes. A consistent prayer life keeps you spiritually sharp in a world designed to dull your faith. Prayer is not confined to a specific place or posture. You can pray while driving, walking, working, or waiting. It's the silent cry of your heart, the whispered acknowledgement that you depend on God for every breath. When your mind is set on Him, even your thoughts become prayers. You can thank Him silently in the middle of a crowd or talk to Him in the quiet of the night. This constant communion keeps your spirit attuned to His voice. You start recognizing divine opportunities that others miss because you're tuned in to the right frequency. Praying without ceasing also means you stay ready. Life will throw unexpected challenges your way. A phone call that changes everything, a sudden loss, an overwhelming demand. In those moments, you don't have time to get ready, you must be ready. A life of constant prayer keeps your spiritual reflexes trained. You respond not with panic but with peace, not with fear but with faith, because your first instinct is to reach for God. When prayer is woven into your daily routine, God becomes your first resort, not your last. Constant prayer doesn't make life easier, but it makes you stronger. It keeps your perspective anchored in eternity while living in a temporary world. It turns ordinary moments into holy moments because every breath becomes an invitation for God to work. When prayer becomes as natural as breathing, your life becomes an ongoing conversation with the Creator. You stop visiting God on special occasions and start walking with Him daily. That's what it means to pray without ceasing, to live so connected to God that there's never a moment when your heart is out of touch with heaven. When a believer prays, something begins to happen in the unseen realm. Prayer is the key that unlocks heaven's resources and releases divine power into earthly situations. It activates what human effort cannot accomplish. You can be talented, intelligent, and well-connected, but there are problems that no amount of skill or strength can fix. That's where prayer steps in. Prayer invites God's supernatural ability to do what your natural ability cannot. It's the moment when heaven gets involved in your story. The enemy doesn't tremble when you make a plan or when you make a post. He trembles when you pray because prayer calls on the authority of the Almighty. The power of prayer isn't in the words themselves, it's in the one who hears them. When you call on the name of Jesus, you're invoking all authority in heaven and on earth. Through prayer, you have access to divine intervention, and that's something no earthly system can match. When you pray, you're not sending wishes into the air. You're sending a request to the throne of the universe. The same God who spoke creation into existence is the one who hears you whisper in the dark. That's power. That's privilege. In the book of Acts, the early church understood this truth. When Peter was thrown into prison, the believers didn't start a protest. They started praying. And while they prayed, chains broke and doors opened. That wasn't coincidence, it was divine response. Prayer moved heaven's power into an earthly prison. The same power that opened Peter's cell can open the doors in your life that seem sealed shut. When you pray, you invite God to step into your situation, and when God steps in, nothing can stay the same. Prayer also gives you access to divine wisdom. Sometimes God doesn't remove the storm, He gives you direction in the middle of it. Prayer positions you to hear what to do next when you have no idea which way to turn. Divine power isn't always about spectacular miracles. Sometimes it's about supernatural guidance. God can whisper one word in prayer that changes the entire course of your decision. That's why the enemy fights so hard to keep you from praying, because he knows prayer keeps you in tune with God's plan and out of reach of his traps. Prayer activates heaven, but it also transforms the one who prays. The more you pray, the more God's power reshapes your heart, aligns your desires, and strengthens your faith. It moves you from fear to faith, from striving to resting. When you live a life of prayer, you start to see impossible situations differently. You stop saying, "I can't," and start saying, "God can." That's not positive thinking. That's powerful faith rooted in a powerful God. Prayer isn't about getting God to move toward you. It's about moving yourself into alignment with Him so His power can freely flow through you. When you pray, heaven gets to work, and no force in hell can stand against it. Prayer is not confined to certain moments or limited to specific emotions. It is meant to cover every season of your life. Many believers pray when life is hard, but forget to pray when life is good. Others call on God in times of crisis, but grow silent in times of comfort. Yet prayer is not meant to be seasonal, it's meant to be constant. Whether you're walking through the fire or standing on the mountaintop, prayer should remain the heartbeat of your relationship with God. It's the bridge that carries you through every circumstance, joy, sorrow, success, and struggle. When life is good and blessings overflow, prayer becomes an expression of gratitude. It's how we say, "Lord, I recognize that every good and perfect gift comes from you." Gratitude keeps pride out of your blessings. When you fail to pray in times of abundance, you risk forgetting the one who provided it. But when you pray with thanksgiving, you remain humble, remembering that promotion, favor, and increase come from the hand of God. A thankful prayer life keeps your heart soft, your priorities right, and your faith grounded in the giver, not the gift. When life is painful, prayer becomes your lifeline. It's how you release your burdens instead of carrying them. In moments of sorrow, prayer gives you strength to keep going. It's not always about finding the right words. Sometimes it's just groaning before God, trusting that He understands the cries your mouth can't form. David said, "I pour out my complaint before Him. I tell my trouble before Him." That's what prayer does. It allows you to empty yourself so that God can fill you with peace. You might not get instant answers, but you will always receive His presence, and His presence is enough to sustain you. In seasons of confusion, prayer becomes your compass. It aligns your heart with God's will and clears your spiritual vision. When you don't know what to do next, prayer reminds you that God's wisdom is greater than your understanding. It teaches you to wait on Him, to trust His timing even when it doesn't match your own. Through prayer, you begin to realize that every season has a purpose. The waiting, the winning, the weeping, all of it can draw you closer to God if you keep praying through it. Even in moments of failure, prayer keeps the door of grace open. When guilt or shame tries to silence you, prayer invites mercy to speak louder. God never rejects a repentant heart. You may fall short, but prayer allows you to rise again through forgiveness. That's why you must pray in every season, because prayer doesn't just change your situation. It changes you in every situation. Whether you're in the sunshine of success or the storm of suffering, prayer is the anchor that keeps your faith steady. Seasons change, but the need for prayer never does. To pray is to acknowledge dependence, to admit that you don't have all the answers, all the strength, or all the control. Prayer is the believer's declaration that God, I can't, but you can. It is the posture of humility before the throne of grace, where you let go of self-sufficiency and lean fully on divine sufficiency. The world teaches independence, to rely on your ability, your intelligence, and your connections, but prayer teaches surrender. Every time you bow your head, you're confessing that you need help beyond human reach. You're saying, Lord, without you, I am nothing. That posture of dependence is not weakness, it is wisdom. True prayer doesn't begin with pride, it begins with humility. God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble, and prayer is the door through which that grace flows. When you depend on yourself, your resources are limited to what you can do, but when you depend on God, your possibilities expand to what He can do. Dependence doesn't mean inaction. It means you act with the confidence that God is directing your steps. You move, but you move under His guidance. You plan, but you surrender the outcome to His will. You fight, but you fight from a place of faith, knowing the battle belongs to the Lord. Dependence through prayer also requires trust. You must trust that God knows more than you, sees farther than you, and loves you enough to guide you through what you don't understand. Sometimes dependence means praying and waiting. Sometimes it means praying and obeying. Either way, it means letting go of the illusion of control. Many people pray but still hold on to the worry as if God needs their help managing the outcome. But real dependence releases the problem completely. It says, "Lord, I don't just hand this to you, I take my hands off it." That's when peace begins to replace panic, because you've shifted the weight from your shoulders to His. Dependence also shows up in how you respond to life's interruptions. When things don't go your way, do you complain first or pray first? Do you lean on your understanding or lean into God's? Prayer becomes the reflex of the dependent heart. It's the automatic response to uncertainty, not a last-minute backup plan. When dependence is your posture, you stop striving to control outcomes and start surrendering to God's direction. You begin to realize that prayer doesn't manipulate God into doing what you want. It positions you to receive what He wills. The posture of dependence keeps pride from poisoning your progress. Even when blessings come, you stay grounded, recognizing that success is not self-made but grace-given. Every victory drives you back to your knees, not away from them. That's why dependence through prayer is so powerful. It keeps you connected to the source of all strength, wisdom, and provision. The moment you stop praying, you start drifting into self-reliance, and that's when spiritual weakness sets in. But when prayer remains your posture, you walk daily in divine partnership, acknowledging that every breath, every blessing, and every breakthrough comes from the hand of God. A life of continual prayer produces both peace and power, two gifts that the world cannot provide and circumstances cannot take away. When prayer becomes a constant part of your walk with God, it stabilizes your emotions and strengthens your spirit. You begin to experience a kind of peace that doesn't make sense to the natural mind. The peace Paul spoke of when he said it surpasses all understanding. That peace doesn't come from the absence of trouble, it comes from the presence of God. Through prayer, you learn to rest even while the storm is still raging, because you know who's in control of the winds and the waves. Prayer replaces anxiety with assurance. When you pour your heart out to God, you make an exchange. You hand Him your worry, and He hands you His peace. It's not that the problem disappears, but its power over you does. Prayer shifts your focus from the problem to the provider. It reminds you that God is still on the throne, still working, still faithful. Every time you pray, you're training your heart to trust that whatever comes, God's presence will be enough to sustain you. That is where real peace is born, not in perfect conditions, but in a perfect God. Alongside peace, continual prayer brings power, spiritual power that strengthens you for every battle you face. Prayer doesn't just calm your heart, it equips your hands. When you stay connected to God through prayer, you receive divine energy that keeps you moving when you would otherwise give up. The strength of prayer isn't physical, it's supernatural. It's what allows you to stand firm in faith when everything around you is shaking. Through prayer, the weak become strong, the weary are renewed, and the fearful become bold. It's not because of who you are, but because of who God is within you. That power also gives you authority over the enemy. A praying believer is a dangerous believer because they operate under heaven's backing. The enemy knows he cannot defeat a person who refuses to stop praying. Even when you're under attack, prayer becomes your weapon and your shield. It reminds you that victory is not won by might or by power, but by the Spirit of the Lord. Every time you pray, you reinforce heaven's authority over your situation and weaken the hold of darkness. Living a life of prayer, filled peace and power doesn't mean everything will be easy, but it does mean you'll never walk alone. When your heart is in continual communion with God, His peace guards your mind and His power carries you through. You begin to walk differently, not by fear, but by faith, not with trembling, but with confidence. Prayer fills you with quiet strength, unshakable hope, and enduring courage. And as that peace and power grow within you, they begin to overflow, touching your home, your relationships, and every corner of your life.